the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for joining us. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Pierre Rogers of PuroTrader. Pierre, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what was your background before launching startups? What did you do before this?
So if we take it way back, I've always been an entrepreneur, whether it was starting a landscaping company when I was just a couple of years old, so about 11, 12 years old, to actually buying candy wholesale in high school, junior high school, and selling it out of my locker. But more professionally than that, I started as an analyst for Putnam and quickly discovered that not only did I like being an analyst, but I actually liked engaging with folks, right? Talking. I'm a bit of a talker. So I moved from there to the wholesale side of asset management. So I would work for two different $1 trillion asset managers. One was Bank of America, another Prudential. And my job was to interface with our very largest clients, specifically names like CalPERS, Boeing, UPS, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, et cetera. These would be sort of consultants that would purchase our investments and have to understand how they work, what they're positioned for in the upcoming market, et cetera. So that's really where I spent the first bulk of my career before moving to the startup side.
So what excites you right now? What do you think is really exciting these days?
So there have been so many changes so rapidly, which is really one of the most exciting parts of the startup landscape. And so 2 years ago, I got into venture investing in a significant way and joined a venture firm. And shortly thereafter, started my own company. And when we looked into the landscape and how quickly things have changed, there are some things that are changing that are a bit sleepers. And what I mean by that is the payment processing side of businesses has changed dramatically, but it's frankly something that a lot of people don't really talk about. And yes, people talk about Bitcoin and crypto, but more mundane than that is you have a lot of platforms that are out there that are changing the landscape in which we do business, right? So traditionally, it would be a much more client to business, right? C2P style payment processing. Well, now being self-serving for a moment, as well as looking at many other businesses, that's not necessarily true. You have many, many platforms that are out there that are conducting business between three different parties. Uber is a great example. Airbnb is a great example where it's customer to platform, platform to customer, right? So it's changed, and we're seeing some really innovative stuff happening there as well.
Well, that's great. So for those investors out there, what's your advice for them investing in startups in the libation sector? What do you tell them to think about first before they write that check?
Part of it comes down to looking at where that startup is in their cycle, right? Are they pre-seed or a seed stage investment, or is it a later stage, Series A or Series B? There's different things that you want to look for along the way. If it's an earlier stage company, don't get caught up in the numbers. The numbers really don't mean anything. Really get to know the entrepreneur. The grittiness there, you're really investing in the team, and specifically not just the team, but also who the team's advisors are. Typically, a team here is going to be somewhere between 4 to 10 people. And you really want to understand who they are on a personal level, not just what their resume says. Oftentimes, the difference between success and failure in this space really comes down to being gritty and creative and not having a very can-do attitude and never giving up. That really has a lot to do with it in the beginning. As things change and you go from there to a Series A in a more traditional investment, well, that's when the metrics start to matter a lot more. And so we pay more attention to the business, as it were. So long-winded answer, but those are the two ways that I look at both those pieces. Within the libation sector specifically, because it is so much more complicated than any other business outside of marijuana, one of the things that you want to look for is their relationships within that industry, right? So not just what they've done, but who they know within that sector. As the libations world, define it as wine, whiskey, premium cigars, what have you. Any of those things are frankly old businesses that have been around for forever, and relationships matter significantly in that space. So their ability to leverage those is going to be critical if they're going to be successful.
And so, what's your advice for people running startups in the libation sector? What do you tell them to consider before they launch that company?
It's a couple of things. Why would people choose you is number one, right? So what value do you bring? What is it? Ease of use? Is it cost savings, et cetera? How are you bringing value to that space? While there's a lot of margin to be had in that business, as we all know, wine and alcohol, are Keystone Plus products, it can be difficult to carve out your niche. So figuring out what your niche really is and how you address that particular customer. This has been said a million times, but it bears repeating. If your customer is everybody, your customer is nobody, right? You really have to understand who your individual customer is and build a product for them. And I very much subscribe to the theory that you really need to get to the minutia here. So you want to build an ideal customer in your mind and have your entire team know who that person is. You want to know, are they male, are they female, what state they live in, what town they live in, what car do they drive, where do they go on vacation, how much money do they make, et cetera, et cetera. You really want to build a very in-depth profile on this sort of quote unquote perfect customer and figure out why they would buy your service, right? So who is that perfect person? And if you really get down to the nitty gritty and understand who that person is, then going and finding more of them becomes much, much easier. And you can really have something special. But if you just say, hey, I sell wine for the everyman, that's for nobody, right? It becomes noise in the marketplace and it's very unlikely to succeed.
So let's talk more about how this industry is evolving. What are the biggest changes you see out there, and what are the numbers behind some of these changes?
So distribution, without a doubt, distribution is the biggest change, right? And so without really breaking down into the three subcategories within libations, which is sort of generically, you've got wine and beer. Next, you've got spirits as a whole. And lastly, premium tobacco. And I break down those three that way because the regulatory environment for each one of those is similar, but not the same. And actually, the differences can be massive on whether you should make a decision to invest or not invest or run a startup in that space or not. For instance, the rules around wine are much more forgiving or relaxed than they are around whiskey, let's say. But the biggest thing is really distribution, right? You've got companies like Thirsty that have gotten into the distribution way in a big way. You've got other alcohol delivery systems that we really didn't have just a few years ago. And that's really challenging the regulators, right? Because of course, any of these restricted brands have a tiered system, meaning manufacturer to wholesaler, wholesaler to retailer, retailer to you. These platforms are changing that completely, and it will be interesting to see how the market responds to it.
Well, let's talk about PuroTrader for a moment. How does PuroTrader fit into that landscape, and what are the challenges that it faces in that landscape?
Certainly. So PuroTrader originally started as just premium cigars for nerdy collectors like me. That business has evolved over time, and we've actually converted into more of a kayak.com aggregator-esque model where we bring in a bunch of retailers that all plug in their inventory in real time. And then you, the consumer, can come on, always find the inventory, always find the thing that you're looking for, and you find it at the best price, right? Sort of a true aggregator style model. And there, of course, because it's premium tobacco, the regulatory hurdles there have been enormous on a state-by-state basis, but even, and what I alluded to earlier, from a payment processing standpoint as well, just facilitating payments through multiple parties when it's across state lines, it's restricted. So you need to have age verification and identity verification and tax collection. So there's a lot of moving parts that are in there to unpack. As time has evolved, we've really expanded our verticals and have added wine as a much bigger component to our platform. Now, here's where something changes. Because in the wine market, unlike the cigar market, there were a lot of players in the wine market already, right? Wine is more than 100x larger than the premium tobacco market. And just for your listeners to know, the United States smokes more cigars in 2018 than any other year in history. So despite the regulatory environment, cigar consumption is at an all-time high. That being said, wine is still 100x larger than that. So just a massive business. So how are we going to carve out a niche? How are we going to bring value? And so if you've ever drank wine, you've probably done it in a more of a celebratory manner, right? So it's been with a spouse, at a wedding, at a nice dinner out, wherever it's been. Wine tends to be a more celebratory beverage and something we really make memories with. But one of the problems that you as a user have, as a drinker of wine, is there's so many different varietals and bottles and years, and there's so much out there that, well, you want the best bang for your buck, right? It's impossible to know everything. We're not all sommelier. And so you go to a restaurant or you go to your local liquor store, wherever you go, and it can be very overwhelming for you to figure out which one of those is the right one. And so we've actually solved that for you. And so we've created a service where you simply take a picture of a wine menu. It scans the menu and it tells you, it aggregates all the reviews. So what Robert Parker says, what Wine Spectator says, what all the experts say, and gives that a score. Then it looks at all the prices and compares those to retail and gives you a ratio and says, this is the best bottle for you to choose, meaning it has the highest amount of reviews from the experts at the lowest price. Most of us, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for kind of the best bang for our buck. How do I figure that out? And so we've solved for that. And that's the way that we add value to our customers, because they very quickly can take a single picture of a wine menu, give a perfect recommendation every time. They get the best experience. And then from a business perspective, we're able to now know more about that customer, where they were, what they drank, etc. It helps market back to them to keep them happy with their purchases.
Well, it sounds like a tremendous data analytics solution to a challenging problem. How do you keep up with so many different choices out there, and how do you weigh the trade-offs that go between the different ones as well? Where do you plan to go with PuroTrader in the future with that type of data?
So that's exactly right. So we monetize on two different ways. One is the obvious, right? Steve goes out to dinner. It's a business dinner and he doesn't know what to order. He takes a quick picture of the menu. It gives him a recommendation. He looks like a genius because he picks a great bottle of wine at dinner. We then know that he bought that wine. We can market him back to that wine in the future. So that's great. We make margin on that. But to your point, the real value is trending, right? So we get to see what the market is doing far ahead of everybody else. So we can tell that what part of the country buys what type of wine, how often they buy it. And we get to see that trend data and then market it back to manufacturers, right? So when you think about how valuable that is, wine is a slow moving business, right? So if you start to see a trend that, say, Russian River Valley Pinot Noir is starting to sell better, it can take you 2, 3, 4 years to bring that wine to market. So knowing a year in advance can be everything if you're a major manufacturer and you're trying to respond to that demand, right? So that data is incredibly valuable, and we market that back to some of the major manufacturers so that they can be better prepared for upcoming changes in taste.
Well, that's a tremendous solution for a market that's continuing to grow quite dramatically as well. You apply this to all segments of the libations area, or is it just for the cigar portion?
Cigar and wine are the two markets that we look at currently. That's really where we spend all of our focus. And should we continue to go down this road, we may add one more vertical, which would be whiskey. And what you'll find with all of those three market segments, whether you're just looking at premium cigars, you're looking at wine, or you're looking at whiskey, the overlap, right? The cohort, the end customer tends to be very similar that purchase those items. They tend to be from major cities. They tend to be affluent. They almost always have higher education. They tend to drive Audis and BMWs. The overlap there is incredibly strong. So we're not constantly reinventing the wheel here. We're finding that perfect customer, like I talked about earlier, and adding to their life, right? We're making those memories even better for them through these libations.
Well, that's great. Sounds like a great opportunity for expansion in the future. In the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Startup investing is exciting and challenging and just an enormous amount of fun. And so what I would put out to people is really just listen to as many startups that are out there in all various sectors, not just my favorite sector, the libation space, but everywhere. Because Inspiration can hit you from anywhere. Networking can happen from all over. But the biggest thing I would have is that I would like people to take away from is listen more about startups and what interesting people are doing and building. I like to say that we need more builders, right, in the world. We need more people starting companies and pushing innovation forward. That's what makes America great. That's what makes the world great. And so keep listening to those entrepreneurs, keep cheering them on, invest with them, talk with them, help them out. We're all part of this ecosystem.
Well, great. That's good advice. So how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Absolutely. So most people find me on my personal page. That's just pierrerogers.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn and you can hit me up there.
Well, great. We'll put those in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
I really appreciate the time. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.